Hey everyone, this video is going to cover one of my sample essays for the Section C comparative text response for the longest memory and 7 stages. But don't worry, if you're not doing these texts, you may still find value on how I structure and phrase particular sections. And if you're curious about how I structure my essays, please refer to my essay writing intro video in the description, because I'm not going to cover anything that I mentioned there again. But anyways, let's get started. So the topic here is, how does skin color shape the experiences of the characters in the two texts? So the main idea that I'm thinking here is that skin color has resulted in a disparity of experiences, privileging some and oppressing others. And the message is something along the lines of, this should not occur. All skin colors should be treated the same. Okay, with that in mind, let's have a look at my introduction. With the intro, I begin with, whether it be the vainglorious histories of the colonies of Australia or the cotton fields of the American South, both have borne tragic legacies of disenfranchised and silenced peoples. Only thing I'll note here for this first sentence is that you should, first of all, make it engaging, and second of all, make sure it gives context to the text that you're exploring. Okay, next sentence. This is where I'm introducing the text. I'm not going to read all of it out because otherwise it'll be too long, but the key thing here is that near the end, I introduce my contention. So here, both texts challenge a system where the Eurocentric construct of skin color and race dictated the experiences of those oppressed and favored those more superior. Okay, let's break down this contention. Why is this good? Because first, it answers the prompt. The prompt, remember, how does skin color shape the experiences? So I'm saying here that because of skin color, there's the oppressed experience and there's the privileged experience. So that's how this answers the prompt. Now, you don't want to stop there. You want to keep going. And the way you make your writing more sophisticated is by expanding on the prompt. So this is what I do in the next line. So you can read the first part, and then I say, both texts assert the importance of lending a collective ear to those long silenced voices, so that the color of one's skin can no longer be a simplistic sign of social division. So I'm not only saying that skin color shapes the experiences, but I'm saying that in the future, or both texts are urging us to realize that skin color should not and will not shape the experiences of characters in the future. So hopefully that makes sense for the introduction, and this is basically the structure of my essay. I start off with talking about the little hope in society because of the oppressed and privileged experience, but then I move to a more hopeful stance near the end, where I'm talking about how this can be changed. Okay, let's move on to paragraph number 1. Before I start reading, just so you know how I structure my paragraphs, this is a rough guide. Again, there's many ways to do it, but just choose the way that suits you the best. But I personally like to begin with a topic sentence, then introduce text 1 and give 2 examples, then the transition sentence into the next text 2 and give 2 examples for that, and then a link. So let's see how that plays out. With my topic sentence, I begin with, sanctioned by egregious self-serving and racist ideologies, the vast economic empires in both texts were founded upon dehumanizing policies that created a society that entitles one skin color over the other. So for my first paragraph, I really like to talk about the causes. So in this case, causes for why skin color shapes the experiences of characters. So things like racist beliefs, abuses of power, and so on. So I personally like to start with a historical context in paragraph 1, and then move on to more modern ideas. And again, see if this works for your text, if these 2 texts are not what you're doing. But from experience, I usually find a high level of success from starting with the causes paragraph. Okay, let's move on. So for this first section, again, I'm not going to read everything out, but basically what I say here is that the abuses of power entrenched the social and political privileges. And how is this shown? This is shown through their racist beliefs, so that Africans were supposedly inferior, and their abuse of the whip that eats flesh. And all these things combined, what they do is to assert the hegemony of master and slave. Now, this is important, this last bit, because this is what links to the topic. Remember, the topic was how does skin color shape the experiences? Well, the abuses of power clearly resulted in one class being treated like a master and the other being a slave. So for the next part, I talk about the Virginian editorials. Carrying the same racist ethos beneath their veneer of civility, The Virginian editorials equated slaves with chattel and stock, which highlights their callous prioritization of profit over human dignity. One thing here to note is that I like to begin with lead-in sentences. Now, lead-in sentences are basically sentences at the start of these small chunks that give some extra details about what you're going to discuss. So here at the start, carrying the same racist ethos beneath their veneer of civility, this kind of already gives the reader some preconceptions about what the Virginian editorials are like. So in this case, the Virginian editorials appear to be civil, so they appear to be educated, but they're just using that to hide their racist beliefs. Now, with that in mind, that makes it much more clearer why they equated slaves with chattel and stock, not because they were civil, but because they only cared about profit. Now, continuing on, you can read this part, and then the last part I want to emphasize because this part, the plantation owners were able to have significant physical and psychological control over those who were treated like an investment. Why did I include this part? Because it links to the topic. Please remember to do this. Now, how does this relate to experiences and skin color? Well, clearly, one skin color made you wealthy and the other an investment, something subhuman. Again, I'm not saying this is correct, but at this time, this was what occurred. All right, so that's the longest memory, that red section. Now we move on to the transition sentence, so this green part here, where I say, Deguar blames constitutionally sanctioned injustices, so slavery as a system, whereas Enoch and Melman say it's colonial prejudices and its ongoing impacts. That's why racism is ingrained. So it wasn't a one-off event, but it's something that has reverberating consequences until this day. And that's why it's ingrained. And this is a preface quote, so feel free to use those. Now, I begin the blue section, so the 7 stages of grieving, so the second text, with akin to the abuse of power of the plantation owners. So I'm beginning with a comparative phrase. Now, the reason I like to have this at the start is because it prevents me from forgetting to include one of these phrases and then losing marks because of that. So you don't need to have it at the start, but if you're afraid that you're going to forget to include one of these sentences or comparative analysis, try and put that as early in your piece as possible. Okay, continuing on, I basically say Enoch and Melman talk about the European imperialists in Australia and how they basically used violence to suppress any physical and psychological freedoms. Now, this should sound familiar because this is a direct analog of what I talked about in this red section, in this first part, where I talked about the whip. So in both cases, they're using physical violence, and that's why I made this comparison, akin to the abuse of power. Okay, continuing on, apart from similarities, you also want to find differences, and that's why I have this green section here, with a greater focus on contemporary injustices. So 7 stages focuses more on modern scenes, and this is shown through how cultural genocide seeps into modern-day racial profiling and structural inequality. And this is shown through Mugshot, the detached court report, or the hypocritical depiction of Aboriginal marches as defiant. So from these 2 examples, it's clear that their experiences are fabricated to suit the privileged lifestyles of the white mainstream public. So if you're asked about how skin color shapes the experiences, well, it's clear that one experience was allowed to dominate over the other. So linking all of this together, I'm basically saying that the prejudice woven into the social fabric results in starkly different experiences for white and black characters. Okay, so that's it. In the next video, we'll be talking about paragraph 2.